Chapter 21 of Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, the Hammer of Thor. This is pretty good. Pretty good now. Chapter 20 ended when Magnus, Hearthstone, Blitzen, who's now Granite, I think it was just those three, they exited out of a plane in mid-flight going to Alfheim. And so when the last word of chapter 20 stated, Magnus was saying that he was falling. So they just poofed out of the plane, and then the last words that is, then I fell. Very cool. Chapter 21. People that load will be shot, then arrested and shot again. Blitzen once told me that dwarfs never left home without a parachute. Now I understand the wisdom in that. Hearthstone and I plummeted through the frigid air, me waving my arms and screaming. Hearth was a perfect swan dive with Granite Blitzen tied to his back. Hearth glanced over at me reassuringly, as if to say, "Don't worry, this dwarf is bubble-wrapped." My only response was more incoherent screaming, because I didn't know the ASL for "Holy freaking God!" We punched through a cloud and everything changed. Our fall slowed. The air turned warm and sweet. The sunlight intensified, blinding me. We hit the ground, well, sort of. My feet touched down on freshly mowed grass, and I bounced right off, feeling like I weighed about 20 pounds. I astronaut skipped across the lawn until I found my balance. I squinted through the smearing sunlight, trying to get my bearings. Acres of landscapes, tall trees, big houses. In the distance, everything seemed halo in fire. No matter which direction I turned, I felt as though a spotlight was shining straight in my face. Hearthstone grabbed my arm and pressed something into my hands, a pair of dark sunglasses. I put them on, and the stabbing pain in my eyes subsided. "Thanks," I muttered. "Is it this bright all the time?" Hearthstone frowned. I must have been slurring my words. He was having trouble reading my lips. I repeated the question in sign language. "Always bright?" Hearth agreed. "You get used to it." He scanned our surroundings as if looking for threats. He landed on the front lawn of a big estate. Low stone walls hedged the property. A golf course-sized expanse of well-kept flower beds and thin willow trees that looked as if they'd been pulled upward by gravity as they grew. The house was a Tudor-style mansion with headed glass windows and conic turrets. "Who lives here?" I signed to Hearth. "President of Alfheim?" "No, just family. The Makepeaces." He spelled out their names. "They must be important," I signed. Hearth shrugged. "Regular middle-class people." I laughed, then realized he wasn't joking. If this was a middle-class family of Alfheim, I didn't want to split a lunch tab with the 1%ers. "We should go," Hearth signed. "Makepeaces don't like me." He readjusted his scarf harness for Blitzen, who probably weighed no more than a regular backpack in Alfheim. Together we headed for the road. I have to admit, the lighter gravity made me feel, well, lighter. I bounded along, covering 5 feet with every step. I had to restrain myself from leaping further. With my warrior-like strength, I wasn't careful. I might have found myself jumping over a rooftop in the middle-class mansions. As far as I could tell, Elfheim had just row after row of estates like this mansion these people make pieces. Each property at least several acres, each lawn dotted with flower beds and tapestries. In the cobblestone driveway, black luxury SUV gleamed. The air smelled like a bakery and a crisp dollar bills. Sam had said our flight path to Norwood would put us over the best drop zone. Now, this made sense. In the same way Nedevar resembled Southie, Elfheim reminded me of the push suburbs west of Boston, Wellesley. Maybe, with its huge houses and pastoral landscapes, its winding roads, picturesque creeks, and sleepy aurora of absolute safety, assuming you belong there. On the downside, the sunlight was so harsh it incinerated every imperfection. Even one stray leaf or wilted flower in a garden stood out as a glaring problem. My own clothes looked dirtier. I could see every pore on the back of my hand and the veins under my skin. I also understood that Hearthstone meant about Elfheim being made of air and light. The only place seemed unreal. His holy place seemed unreal, like it was whisked together from cotton candy fibers and might dissolve with a splash of water. Walking across the spongy ground, I felt uneasy, impatient. The super dark sunglasses only did so much to alleviate my headache. After a few blocks, I signed to Hearthstone. "Where are we going?" He pursed his lips. "Home." I caught his arm and made him stop. "Your home?" I signed. "Where you actually grew up?" Herr stared at the nearest quaint garden wall. Unlike me, he wore no sunglasses. In the brilliant daylight, his eyes glittered like a crystal formations. "Skofnug stone is at my house," he signed, "with my father." The sign for father was an open hand, palm facing out, thumb across the forehead. It reminded me of L for loser. Given what I knew about Hearth's childhood, that seemed appropriate. Once in Joheim, I'd done some healing magic on Hearth. I'd got a glimpse of the pain he carried around inside. He's been mistreated and shamed while growing up, mostly because of his deafness. Then his brother had died. I didn't know the details, and his parents had blamed Hearth. He couldn't possibly want to go back to home like that. I remember how strongly Blitzen had protested the idea, even when he knew he was going to die. "Don't make Hearth go. Not worth it, kid." Yet, here we are. "Why?" I signed. "Why would your father, loser, have the Skofnug stone?" Instead of answering, Hearthstone nodded in the direction we've come home. Not in the direction we've come from. Everything is so bright in Elf world. I hadn't noticed the flashing lights until the sleek black town car pulled up directly behind us. Along the sedan's front grille, red and blue sequencers pulsated. Behind the windshield, two elves in business suits scowled at us. Elfheim Police Department had come to say hello. "Can we help you?" asked the first cop. Right then I knew we were in trouble. In my experience, no cop ever said, "Can we help you?" If he had any actual desire to help. Another giveaway, cop's number one's hand was resting on the butt of his firearm. Cop's number two Cop number 2 edged around the passenger side, also looking ready to break out some helpful deadly force. Both elves were dressed like plainclothes detectives in dark suits and silk ties with ID badges clipped onto their belts. Their short cropped hair was as blonde as Thurstone's. They had the same sort of pale eyes and eerie, calm expressions. Otherwise, they looked nothing like my friend. The cop seemed taller, splendor, more alien. They exuded a cold air of disdain, as though they had a personal air conditioner unit installed under their shirt collars. The other thing I found strange, they spoke. I spent so much time around Hearthstone, who communicated in elegant silence, that hearing an elf speak was really jarring. It just seemed like weird and wrong. Both cops focused on Hearthstone. They looked right through me as if I didn't exist. "I asked you a question, pal," the first cop said. "Is there a problem here?" Hearthstone shook his head. He edged back, but I caught his arm. Retreating would only make things worse. "We're good," I said. "Thanks, officers." The detective stared at me like I was from another world, which, to be fair, yeah, I was from another world. The ID tag on the cop number 1's belt read Sunspot. He didn't look much like a sunspot. Then again, I guess I didn't look much like a chase. Cop number 2 ID read Wildflower. With a handle like that, I wanted him to be wearing a Hawaiian shirt or at least a floral pattern tie, but his outfit was just as boring as his partner's. Sunspot wrinkled his nose as if I smelled like a weight barrow. Where'd you learn Elvish, Thick? Where you learn Elvish, Thick? That accent is horrible. Thick? I asked. What is he talking about? Wildflower smirked at his partner. What do you bet Elvish isn't his first language? Illegal Husfer would be my guess. I wanted to point out that I was a human speaking English, and it was my first language, also my only language. Elfish and English just happen to be the same, like Hearth's Elf Sign language was the same as American Sign Language. I doubt the cops would listen or care. The way they spoke was a little strange to my ears, a sort of old-fashioned, aristocratic American accent I heard on newsreels and movies from the 1930s. Look, guys, I said, we're just taking a walk. It's a nice neighborhood, said Sunspot, where I'm guessing you don't live. The Makepeaces down the road, they called in a report. Somebody trespassing, loitering. We take that sort of thing seriously, Thick. I had to tramp down my anger. As a homeless person, I've been a frequent target for rough treatment by law enforcement. My dark-skinned friends who got it even worse. So during the 2 years I lived on the street, I learned a whole new level of caution when dealing with friendly neighborhood police officers. And yet, I didn't like being called thick. Whatever that was, that's a weird description to call me. Officers, I said, we've been walking for maybe 5 minutes. We're heading to my friend's house. How is that loitering? Hearthstone signed to me, careful. Sunspot frowned. What was that? Some kind of gang sign? Speak Elvish, boy. I said he's deaf. Deaf? Wildflower's face scrunched up in disgust. What kind of elf? What? Who ya, partner? Sunspot swallowed. He tugged at his collar like his personal AC had stopped working. Is that? No. That's gotta be. What? You know, like Mr. Alderman's kid? Is that Alderman's kid? Wildflower's expression shifted from contempt to fear. It wouldn't have been kind of satisfying to watch, except that a fearful cop was way more dangerous than a disgusted one. Mr. Hearthstone? Wildflower asked. Is that you? Hearthstone nodded grumbly. Sunspot cursed. All right. Both of you in my car. Hoo-ya. Why? I demanded. If you're arresting us, I want to know the charges. We're not arresting you, Thick, Sunspot growled. We're taking you to see Mr. Alderman. After that, Sunflower added, you won't be our problem anymore. The tone made it sound like he'd be no one's problem, since we'd be buried under a lovely, well-tended flower bed somewhere. The last thing I wanted to do was get in the car, but the cop tapped his fingers on the elfish firearm, showing us just how helpful they were prepared to be. I then climbed into the back of the cruiser. Okay, so chapter 21. So Hearthstone's dad is a very powerful man that even the cops were fearful of. But they have to, Hearthstone and Magnus have to meet with Hearthstone's dad. All right, chapter 21.